Good? Yeah. So this next gentleman, except I need his title. Hold on a second. Just in case I mix up the titles, we wouldn't want to do that. And I'm sure this is going to have to go up just a little bit, this podium here. This next gentleman, we know him in many, many ways around here. Hospitality is one, but we took him out of the kitchen tonight and said you don't belong. But what he doesn't know is I watched him, and he was still sneaking in there, kind of directing things. But that's okay, because he is here right now. Ron Stover, and I just want to make sure we have this. It's in your jeans. It's in your kitchen. What's in your jeans, Ron Stover? Would you like a mic?
I probably would help. Yes. Aloha. Well, have you ever wondered where you came from? And who were your ancestors? Well, I didn't, because I knew. My mother told me that we came from Britain and Northern Europe. And I never questioned that, because I look pretty white, and I seem to fit the description. So, a couple years back, my wife, Suzanne, ordered a DNA kit from Ancestry.com. Yes, and she seemed to think that I would be interested. So, I took the test, and I mailed it in, and a few weeks later, I received an email, I think it was, and it said my results were in. So I wasn't too excited, but I checked anyways. Well, was I ever surprised? Totally blew me away. Instead of England and Northern Europe, I discovered that my genes came from the Middle East. Yes. 29%. And Turkey, Armenia, 19%. And Britain and Northwestern Europe were just a piddly 26%. Wow. Was I surprised? So that brought up a bunch of questions. It clearly wasn't the man I thought was my dad, because he did not come from the Middle East. Yeah, and since I have a full brother and a full sister, I figured I should probably confirm my suspicions. So I asked them to get a DNA test. Well, I even offered to pay for it. They said no. They weren't even interested. But, I kind of didn't let that slide. However, I just kept up, and finally, my younger brother, Don, decided that he would do it. And he wasn't even going to make me pay for it. So I was happy. My brother, I want you to know, doesn't use technology. He barely uses his cell phone. But he sent me a text with the results. Are you ready for this? England, Wales, Northwestern Europe, 43%. Yeah, Germany, 38%. Ireland and Scotland, 10%. And a little Norway and France thrown in them. So that's what I thought I was. So now comes the $1 million question. Who's your daddy? So that brought me to our family reunion last summer. We were at my my brother's log cabin in Pennsylvania, and we spent many an evening ruminating over all the possibilities. Yeah, all of my girls were with us and their families, and we just sat there at night discussing about who might be my father. That's when I found out my brother Don actually had a little more information than I did. There was a couple of buddies that were with my dad in World War II. And they came back to our hometown after the war. And during that time, I was very young, but they were in our lives quite a bit during that time. So we discussed all the possibilities at great length. And we had some people to think about. But we couldn't come to any definite conclusions. We had a lot of possibilities, but since my grandparents had passed a long time ago, and then my mother had just passed a couple of years ago before this, we had no one to confirm any suspicion. We did discuss the fact that my mom was 3 months pregnant when she married my dad. So, more questions. Did my dad know that he wasn't my father? Did he know who my father really was? Did he marry Mom because that was the right thing to do back then? These are questions I'll never have the answer to, not in this lifetime. So, we could come to no final conclusion, but I did come to the big question. Is this really important? And do I really need to know since I'm never going to know? Well, all this talking about my dad brought up my mother. So she was a participating adult in this event. And then I started to think about how much I really didn't know her. And I know nothing about her when she was young and before she was married. Only one time in my entire lifetime did I sit down and talk to her, and she actually shared what happened before she got married. And I found out that she was a nurse, and that on one occasion, she saved the life of her doctor when his home office caught fire. And that was the extent of all I knew about my mother's childhood and her pre-married life. I really didn't know who she was inside. And I'd never taken the time to think about that before. And so then I realized, after all this ruminating, that I never really knew my father. He died when I was young, or my mother. So that started me thinking about me. I started to realize that my adult children don't know about my story, who I truly am. They only know my dad's self. They don't know who I was, and they don't know who I am now. And so that's when the lights came on. I realized I need to bring this generational curse of secrecy to an end. And to do that, I've made a commitment to share my story with my children. And I'm giving them a copy of my presentation tonight. Thank you.
Oh, see what happens when you bring people out of the kitchen? Look what happens. Plus, his shirt is nice, too. There you go.